We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pass it over to Mia to start us out today.
Good morning and welcome to DAR's first Legislative and Regulatory Forum. I'm Mia Birch, 2021 President of the Delaware Association of Realtors. With over 4,100 members, DAR serves as a leading voice for real estate and private property rights in Delaware. 2021 was another successful year for DAR. We helped shut down multiple bills that would have negatively affected our members and private property rights. We have influenced change to legislation and worked with legislators to bring perspective on new policies that help Delaware as a whole. During these discussions on federal and local policy, as well as the regulatory updates, we ask that you keep in mind questions you may have for the presenters. We'd also like to hear your perspective on what DAR's position should be on issues that affect our state as we move forward. Thank you all for participating today. And Amanda Kelly Thompson, DAR's Director of Legislative and Political Affairs, will take it from here.
Great, thank you so much, Mia. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Legislative and Regulatory Forum. This forum will serve as a mechanism for our members to let DAR know what direction they think we should be going in when it comes to statewide legislative and regulatory issues. The Public Policy Committee's mission is to advocate for real estate issues that impact realtors and consumers, such as the protection of private property rights and the real estate industry, quality of life, economic development, the natural environment, business and technology, and public safety. Our Public Policy Committee will take into consideration the updates and feedback they hear today as they consider our public policy positions and any upcoming legislation and regulations that may arise in the coming year. This year's Public Policy Committee was made up of 19 voting members from throughout the state, who this past legislative session reviewed over 45 introduced bills and many additional documents that had a plethora of potential legislation. Today, you will hear from Representative Mike Smith on local policy updates, and then Andy Taylor and Commissioner Randy Marvel will give a regulatory update. But first, we will hear from NAR's Vice President of Government Advocacy, Joe Harris, on federal policy update. If time permits, we will allow for some questions from the audience for each of these presentations. A quick background into Joe Harris. He has been with NAR since 2015. He formerly served as its Director of Federal Legislative and Political Affairs, where his experience and years of relationship developed in Congress helped NAR navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic. Harris spent 8 years on Capitol Hill, handling diverse legislative portfolios for both Senator Joe Lieberman and Congressman John Spratt. He earned his law degree from the University of South Carolina in 2009. So I will now pass it over to him. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate the opportunity. And the reason I'm here and not our good friend, Zach Reuben McCurry, is because he and his wife were very fortunate and had a little boy. So I'm always great to speak to you guys. And obviously it's been a very, very busy couple of weeks here in DC. We right now are in the midst of a markup going on in about 5 House committees trying to decide the fate of the reconciliation legislation. And most of you probably know by now, but there's sort of a 2-track, legislative thing going on where we have a traditional physical surface transportation infrastructure, which passed in a bipartisan way in the Senate, going down one track, and we have more of the healthcare, the prescription drugs, all these different issues, drug pricing, green energy. That's going in a separate track, being called human infrastructure. That's a big part of President Biden's Build Back Better plan. And you've heard a lot at this point, I'm sure, about the $3.5 trillion price tag that's been put on to this legislation. So what essentially has happened is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the physical, traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, clean water, broadband, was passed in a bipartisan way, but the House Speaker of the House doesn't want to bring it up until they pass this bigger, what they call more transformational bill. So at the early going, we had a lot of the moderates in the House insisting on a vote on the bipartisan bill. But just to show you how much distrust there is in Congress right now, the progressives didn't want to bring up the bipartisan bill, had that passed, and then the moderates voted against the bigger bill. So essentially, they said we got to pass the bigger bill before we get past the smaller bill. So it's a little bit of gamesmanship going on, but we have had an opportunity, for over a year now, but particularly in the last few weeks, to really talk to members of the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee about some of the pay-fors they're using for this $3.5 trillion. We saw the chairman's mark yesterday. I think the language came out over the weekend. 1031s are not in there, and neither is the stepped up basis, which we did a call for action on last week. So that's very good news in the early going. Most of the increases are around the corporate tax, international tax, higher income earners. There's a surcharge for folks making, I think it's $10 million or more. So they tried to hit the higher income earners, but at least in the early going, the mark in terms of the pay-fors and the revenue that's going to go to pay for this legislation is going to be better than what we had anticipated for real estate. So that's the good news. But this process is a very long way to go. I mean, it's, in the Senate, we have Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema from Arizona who've indicated they're not going to support a $3.5 trillion bill. The context for that is obviously we have had a pandemic for the last year and a half, 18 months, and we've spent somewhere, depending on which estimates you believe, between $5 and $7 trillion on various COVID relief packages. So I think there's a unwillingness to really go big on items that some members feel aren't necessary at this time, some things that could wait till later on. Of course, the attitude, I think, of congressional Democrats is we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the White House, and it may not be the case after the next election. So we're going to strike while we have the opportunity. We're going to get as much as we can while we can get it. And obviously, there's been some philosophical disagreements even within the Democratic caucus about how much of this spending is necessary and how much of it, could wait till later. So those are the sort of themes that are playing themselves out right now. As I was texting with a member on financial services about the other markup that happened in financial services yesterday. And there is just there's a frustration level just because there's just so many different opinions and so many different ways to go about this. And so there is some frustration, I feel, amongst some of the more conservative, more moderate Democrats, that they're going to be put in a position to vote on something massive and then get hit over the head with that bill later on during election time. So it's very, very difficult right now, for leadership to try to herd all the cattle, so to speak. But we should know in the next few weeks whether this thing is going to come together and how that's going to happen. Of course, the infrastructure and the reconciliation bill aren't the only things going on right now. The other thing that we're tracking, obviously, with the Supreme Court decision to end the CDC eviction moratorium, we've been doing a lot of work around getting the word out about resources available to both landlords and tenants, about getting rental assistance. Maxine Waters, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, has introduced a bill that she's calling the Expediting Assistance to Renters and Landlords Act. We've been very much engaged on this legislation along with our partners, the home builders, the Multifamily Housing Council, NBA, and others have all been engaged on this. We have some concerns with this legislation, but we do appreciate the fact that they are really trying to make it easier, and they're trying to streamline this process to get $50 billion in rental assistance out. And it's come to a slow trickle for a program that's been around for quite a while, since last year. It's shocking how little money has gone out. And I'm interested to hear from you all, actually, what your experience has been in Delaware, about getting this rental assistance out. I can tell you in just about every state, it's been pretty anemic in terms of how much money's going out. So I'm interested to hear from you all about that. People have asked about the Senate and what their role is in all of this. They're a 50-50 split over there. And obviously with Manchin and with Sinema and some other members, they are not doing the same process in terms of reconciliation as the House is doing. What they're doing is a reconciliation basically gave instructions to the 5 committees of jurisdiction to basically fill the substance of the framework with numbers and with programs that can then be repackaged into one bill and submitted to the budget committee. That's the way the process works. Normally, it goes through regular order, which is what's happening in the House, and you have markups and you have all that. In the Senate, the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, has just asked the committee chairs to package these bills, so to speak, these sections of this one bill, and give it right to leadership, and then they're going to package it. They don't want to go through the committee process. They think that there's a lot of things that wouldn't pass in committee, given the very thin margin. So the Senate, for lack of a better term, is letting the House take the lead, and then they're going to come in and do cleanup. But the whole idea is to pass one bill, for the House to pass something, the Senate passes that bill, and off they go to try to conference it and get it passed again and signed by the president. So that's what's going on right now. I wanted to leave some opportunities for folks to ask questions about, legislatively what's going on, or even the political process. Happy to talk about anything else you think would be helpful. So I'll turn it back over to you, Amanda.
Great, thank you so much for that update. We definitely have questions coming in, so I can kind of monitor them and I'll ask them, and feel free. So one question was, do you anticipate that Congress will raise the debt ceiling?
Yes. So this is a very timely issue because we were always asked to weigh in on this, and we usually do because it is a bipartisan issue. Every president, every Congress, whether they be Republican and Democrat, has had to at one point or another raise the debt ceiling. That agreement can be a year. I know that President Trump negotiated a 2-year deal with the Democrats to raise the debt ceiling when it was his time to do it. And now it's under President Biden's watch. It's going to be his time to negotiate with Republicans to try to get a deal, because what you don't want, what neither side wants, is a situation where you have to come every 6 months or it's not good for the economy. It's certainly not good for the markets. And so I think that, yes, it will get done, but there usually are some concessions that are made by the side trying to get these things done. President Trump made concessions to the Democrats when he wanted to get it done. President Obama made some concessions during a bipartisan agreement when he wanted to get it done. President Bush, same thing. But that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. But the important thing to remember about the debt ceiling is that is not future spending. That is not current spending. That is largely past spending, spending that has happened in the previous, since the last debt ceiling was increased. So people oftentimes think that the debt ceiling allows you to spend more, and in many ways it does. But what the debt ceiling really does is allows you to pay bills that you've already accrued. So that speaks to the credit worthiness and the credit rating of the United States, and the value of the dollar, and all those things that go with it. So obviously, from our perspective, it's very important that the debt ceiling be raised, and that's been our position under Republican presidents. It's been our position under Democratic presidents. Do I think it'll get done? I do, because no one wants, the debts. No one wants to go into default. That's just not a very good idea. Particularly right now, when the economy is in a very precarious position. In the midst of a few months, I was saying on the tail end of this pandemic. Now I'm again saying in the midst of this pandemic. As you know, the Delta variant has wreaked havoc around the country. So we're not out of the woods. It makes it even more important that we get this right. But I do, at the end, think that it'll happen. But there's going to have to be some concessions made by President Biden to congressional Republicans to get it done.
Great, thank you. We had a couple questions about rental assistance, and NAR's position has always been that it should go directly to the landlord, correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And what we're seeing, and there have been several iterations of this program. I think the problem has been that the rental assistance program, unlike other programs like, we had the PPP loans and EIDL loans that largely went through federal agencies to be dispersed. With this, Congress, their most immediate, at least this is what the rationale was when they discussed this, the most immediate concern was getting the money to the states as quickly as they could. It's easier to do that through block grants, where every state gets a certain amount of the pot, depending on how many landlords they have, how, their population and all that. But in this case, it probably should have gone through the federal government, because what ends up happening is you have 50 different programs for the 50 different states. A lot of these states don't have the apparatus, they don't have the infrastructure or the personnel to decide, who the landlords are and who the tenants are. I mean, there's some very fundamental questions you have to ask. You can't just start giving money out. You have to do your homework. You have to see, because, whenever there's a lot of money to be given out, there's also a lot of fraud and abuse associated with that. Folks saying that they're landlords, but they're not really landlords. Folks saying that their tenants left them high and dry, and you find out, that's not really the case, or what's been happening more often, landlords not being able to evict folks that they know are able to pay. That has happened. So there's a lot of fact checking, a lot of research that needs to be done into each individual case. But really what we found is the common denominator is that the process has just been onerous and time consuming. And a lot of folks have gone through whatever process their respective state implemented. They will apply. In a lot of cases, they had to have some assistance from their tenant, which created this whole other mess. But you had a situation where you would go through this process and months would go by, you don't hear anything. And so it's been a huge mess. And it's one of those situations where they wanted to get the money out. The money has been approved, but the process by which that money was dispersed was was not well thought out. But it was up to each individual state to sort of figure that out. And some states have been better at it than others. I think Texas is probably leading the way with being the most effective in getting their money out. States like New York have been pitiful. South Carolina, my home state, I think at one point when we started really hounding folks, and we've been doing this since the program started, but we were hounding and hounding and hounding, and states like South Carolina had only compensated 13 landlords, and it had been like 6 months. So it's definitely a process that I think they did something. They figured out that it didn't quite work out the way they wanted to, and they're going back to try to make some changes and help streamline the process for states. And there has been guidance from Treasury, updated guidance on the best way to get that money out. But what we're doing is we're running ads. The RPAC trustees approved a 2-week ad buy, and I think it's 10 or 12 states that are having the most issues. First of all, informing people that they are eligible for rental assistance. And there's been a lot of misconceptions out there. A lot of people think that they're not eligible unless they get COVID. That's not true. You don't have to have COVID in order to qualify for rental assistance. So trying to correct some of the misconceptions out there, and also offering some resources for where to go that are state specific, so that you know exactly where to go to get that rental assistance. And the target audience for that, obviously landlords and tenants, but also policymakers, opinion and thought leaders in those respective communities, just to get that information out. Because our contention has been all along that the best way to handle the situation is not through extending the CDC eviction moratorium for as far as the eye can see. That doesn't solve any problems. The best way is to take the money that Congress has already approved, already dispersed, and get it out to the folks it's supposed to get out to. And that way the landlord is made whole, the tenant has a place to live. But we had to fight the CDC eviction moratorium because it's an easy scapegoat to just keep extending the moratorium, but not dealing with the problem of the rental assistance. And that's what was happening. So, we're hopeful that this is going to work out better than it did the first time around, but that remains to be seen. But we're doing our part to educate the public about it.
Great, that's definitely very important. We've
Yeah.
definitely seen some misconceptions about the money getting dispersed as well.
And how's it going in Delaware? How's it going? Any opinion? If anybody wants to unmute and let me know. I think it'd be helpful for me to know how you feel the process is going in your state with the rental assistance.
Delaware is horrible.
Okay. Is it just the website, the application process, what seems to be the biggest?
The application process. I have two of them out there and never been able to collect a penny. So biggest problem is that the tenants have to start initiating this. When you've got a professional tenant, they're
Yep.
not initiating it, so they think that I don't know. I think they think they've got to pay it back or something. I don't know. They just do not cooperate.
Okay.
This is Monica Hill. I experienced the same thing with a landlord-tenant situation here and was present for the conversation between the tenant and the landlord because the tenant was, 4 or 5 months behind in her rent and was making promises and then not keeping them. And her perception was that there would be a ramification for her on taxes with that money. And so the tenant would not initiate the process. Getting the tenant out of the way in the initiation would be huge to let the landlord be able to initiate the process. And then an assurance to the tenant of what the ramifications are for them. because those waters are very muddy.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think the
Morning.
legislation. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry. It's Morel. I'll speak afterwards.
Oh, Morel. So what I was going to say is I think a big focus of the Maxine Waters bill to correct this is taking the tenant out of that situation of having to be part of the process, because in a lot of cases you're dealing with back rent that is owed and the tenant is not even there. They've either gone and it's been a year, you haven't seen any money. So what we're focused on, and where we have just some disagreements, we're trying to improve this legislation, is making sure that it's not just about what's happened up to this point going forward. It's about what's happened in the previous 18, 19 months of back rent owed, and allowing the landlord to get as much of that back rent as he or she can. That's an extremely important part of that piece for us, for the National Multifamily Housing Council, for the National Apartment Association, of which we're partnering with the home builders. So we have a pretty large real estate coalition working on this and trying to get it right, because and part of this bill is also some policy that says that if the tenant, if you somehow get some of the money that you had owed, you have to extend the eviction moratorium for another 120 days for your tenant. So we're trying to work through some of this language, but we've heard from a lot of people that, you know, a lot of the tenants have not been cooperative. So that's going to be a problem, obviously, because you can't really start the process without that being the case. Merle, I'm sorry to cut you off. You were going to say something.
Oh, no problem, Joe. Thank you. I think we're all singing the same song. I had a similar experience where the first tenant that applied, they went through community legal services, and we did get the back rent plus 3+ months. So that was a positive experience, and I thought this would be pretty good. I had another tenant that we were trying to do the same thing with, but we were trying to spearhead it without community legal service wasn't involved in this particular situation. And I haven't gotten any positive response from it since. So I had one positive experience with community legal services that drove it. And then I had one where we tried to do it with the tenant, but it just didn't work. So yes, I agree with everyone saying that we should try to get the tenants out of that process.
Yeah.
I had taken one to court, was able to get a judgment against the individual, and the court agreed and did a stipulated judgment, they called it, where he was supposed to make payments, which he was capable of doing. He made the first one, never made the second one. Supposedly, according to the stipulated judgment, all I had to do was call up and say, you know, they hadn't made the second payment, and then I would be able to get an eviction. And the judge, I did that. I filed the papers for it and everything else. Took me another 5 months to get him out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Stipulated.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing, and this was very helpful, I'm sure. We're gonna have time, I think, for one more question, so I'm gonna move on just so we can get one more in before we're gonna move on with our program. So
And let me just add that I'll put my email in the chat. So for those questions I couldn't get to, I'll get your question answered one way or the other. Just shoot me an email.
I'm sure that'll be very appreciated by everyone.
Yeah.
We definitely had a lot come in, so okay.
I figured it might be.
Yeah. The last question we'll do is, what do you think will be done with SALT, or the state and local tax?
So that's a very good question. So we obviously support full repeal of SALT. That's been our policy position. Obviously, when you're dealing with a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill with so many things in there, it's going to be very difficult to do a full repeal. So we have also pushed for just doubling that SALT cap for joint married filers. That's been a long held position of ours. Politically, it's very bipartisan. There's a ton of Republicans that support doubling that cap because it essentially amounts to a marriage penalty. And there are a lot of folks, particularly in Republican caucus, that feel that the government shouldn't be punishing folks just because they're married. That has gotten a lot of traction. The practical reality, though, is that it's going to be another revenue buster in a time where they're trying to find revenue. They're trying to tax the wealthy. They're bringing the corporate tax rate up from 21% to 25%. They're trying to find revenue to pay for all these other things that I mentioned, the energy policy, the healthcare policy. So then it's going to be very difficult for the federal government to essentially deny themselves a lot more revenue in order to pay for some type of SALT fix. But let me tell you something. There have been several Republicans, several Democrats that have been part of the SALT caucus in the House. There's at least 10 or 12 Democrats in the House who've indicated that unless there is no SALT, there's not going to be any deal. Tom Suozzi, no SALT, no deal. That's what he keeps saying. They released a statement with Chairman Neal, Ways and Means Chairman Richie Neal, I think yesterday, saying they were still working through this process, but that one way or the other, SALT was going to be addressed. I don't know if that's going to be with a 1-year repeal of the SALT cap. I think the trouble you run into with the repeal of the entire cap, as opposed to having the cap being at, let's say 50,000 or 40,000, or whatever, just pull a number out there. But when you have full repeal, you play into the hands of those, both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, who say that, well, that's just a giveaway to the wealthy who don't really need that tax relief. Why not make sure that that tax relief goes to the folks that actually need it? And you can better do that by having a cap of some kind. So I don't know if it's going to be a full repeal for a year, increasing the cap to 20,000 or 25,000. There's been a lot of solutions, policy solutions bantered about, but I do know that there is a very vocal contingency on the Democratic side who is insisting on SALT being an issue. And they do that because they understand they live in these high SALT states, who a lot of them are going to see their taxes increased in this new tax regime. And on top of that, they're not getting the SALT relief. So in states like New York and California and Illinois and others, it just makes it much more difficult to keep people in the state. So they are very, very bullish on getting something done. They've been very vocal. They've also been on the record. So it's going to be very difficult for them to backtrack and then support a bill that doesn't have some type of SALT fix in there. So I hate to handicap this thing. I think there's probably at this point a 60-40 shot, 60-40 in favor of there being some type of SALT included at this point, without having seen any language. This language has been released. I didn't see anything relating to SALT. They are very much telling people that SALT is still in play, and they're still trying to figure out how to pay for this other stuff. But it's a big expense. But our position is very clear, has been from the beginning. We sent another letter to Congress reiterating our support for addressing the marriage penalty. And just like everybody else, you have to compromise. Full repeal is great, but guess what? We've spent trillions of dollars already. We're trying to figure out a way to get out of this pandemic on the other side, being strong economically. Everyone needs to sacrifice. Everybody needs to compromise. The marriage penalty is a very good compromise because it's just a matter of fairness. If the cap is $10,000 for everybody who takes advantage of it, for single and for joint, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So from a policy perspective, it's good policy, but it also financially, it's a lot cheaper to do that than it is to have a full repeal. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap it up here, but I saw that you put your email in the chat, so everyone has
That's
access.
That's it. I might regret it, but I did it. I did it, and I'm going to get to as many of them as I can. And now, obviously, we have the best policy team in the business at NAR, as you all know. So happy to answer any questions you all might have. But I appreciate the time, and it's always great to be with you.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful update from NAR. I'm sure everyone really appreciated it, and it sounds like you guys are very busy down in DC.
Well, busy times.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next portion of our event. So now we're going to move into our local legislative update. So many of you may have seen that Representative Kevin Hensley was supposed to give a presentation today, but unfortunately he sends his sincerest apologies. He had something pop up. We're very thankful that Representative Mike Smith was willing to fill in last minute and provide a legislative update for our members today. I believe he's on the call. I don't know. Can't see everyone yet.
Hey, Amanda.
Hello. Great. So I'll just do a quick introduction and I'll pass it over to you. So Representative Mike Smith was first elected in 2018 to the House of Representatives, represents the citizens of the 22nd district, which includes Pike Creek Valley, so parts of Hockessin and Newark. As a member of the House, Representative Smith serves on the following committees: Education, Health and Human Development, Labor, Economic Development, Banking, Insurance and Commerce, and Veterans Affairs. So I'll now turn it over to Representative Smith.
Well, thanks for having me, Amanda. And I apologize if I have to jump up real quick and move my computer. My newborn is like sleeping in the other room. So he's been, I was trying to plan around it, but they don't plan as well as we do. Well, I appreciate you having me today. So I guess you just wanted a little bit of an update on what's going to be coming up in the next session probably, and then maybe focus a little bit on redistricting. So one of the big things that's kind of still standing out there that there'll be an alternative bill for is the legalization of marijuana. That's one that was hanging out there that is pretty large and had a lot of issues with it. I think you can kind of debate the policy up here, whether you believe in legalization or not, whatever, that's fine. But really the nuance of the bill and the implementation standards is really what's kind of most important. And there was a lot of issues with it from a lot of different folks. So I'm actually sitting down with the bill sponsor sometime in the next couple of weeks to kind of hash out some of those details, like protections for employers, where some of the revenues may go, things of that nature. I think you can always debate the number of licenses and things like that. I think the market kind of takes care of itself with that sort of a thing. But enough states have done it that we also need to see exactly how it can be implemented in Delaware and learn from that. One interesting issue with that one is technically it still hasn't been passed federally. So one question I had that nobody had an answer for, I just thought was interesting, was, so if you hire state employees to handle this, for instance, are they breaking federal law? And I just found that to be an interesting question if we were to hire people to kind of be the brokers and overseers of that industry. So that one is kind of looming large and looming out there. When it comes to voting, actually in 2022, we start the early voting for up to 10 days prior to the election. So that's something that's coming up you all should be aware about. From a bill sponsorship perspective, there's HB 75. That's the constitutional amendment that would allow for the General Assembly to change the rules for no excuse absentee voting. So in theory, there's no problem with it. I think the biggest problem and where the debate kind of looms, I think you see other states still worrying about the presidential election from last time, arguing fraud or not. That's not what I'm arguing. I think the biggest issue with it is when you change the Constitution to allow the general body to make the rules, in most states right now, unfortunately, there's one party rule. And I think it's unfortunate because that's where a lot of the discourse has come from that's been negative when you don't have balance, because then you don't have dialogue, you don't have a healthy debate. And so that's the only thing I get nervous about, because if you give the General Assembly the ability to change the rules at any time, once you change the Constitution, that's only a simple majority vote. And so that means, any majority can do whatever that they want. And I'd argue that Republicans shouldn't have that power and Democrats shouldn't have that power, that there should be a higher threshold debate. So I said I'd be willing to sit down and talk about that and look through it. The most important part of that bill is actually the next bill. What are the rules you're proposing, right? I've actually not spoken to anyone who doesn't disagree that we should go to no excuse absentee voting. I think we've just talked about, like, what are the rules in place and the checks and balances in place in order to do so. I mean, one issue from the last election with the mail-in ballots wasn't the mail-in ballots themselves. It was the process that we sent them out to everyone, and we sent over 50,000 out that were undeliverable or unreturned. So that goes to how often we clean up the voter file, who's returning it, all of that good stuff. So, look, I think you can, again, another one that you can argue up here and a lot of nasty words get said, but when you get into the nuance of it, they're very reasonable things. There was a bill that was out there for, same day voting, for same day registration. And, my argument with that is, well, these poll workers aren't trained enough to get people in and out of the line quick enough to vote as is. If you add that other process into it, it makes it difficult. And I'll just give you an example. I'm a perfect example, actually. My mother made the unfortunate circumstance of naming me Mike Smith. So with that, I actually went to vote in the last election, and they tried to tell me that I already voted. And so for me, they're like, well, how do I prove that I didn't vote? I know I didn't come in here. You need to show me that I didn't vote. Finally, after 45 minutes, they let me sign an affidavit that said I didn't vote, and it was calculated. But it's just those types of things. And I wish I could say that didn't happen to me before, but it did. So those are the kind of the questions that are looming with that one. I think you'll probably see news media debates about that sort of thing, but those are really the nuanced questions and concerns that go into it. It's not a debate about fraud. It's really just a debate about how it's applied. So I think that will be one that I know you all are interested in, is the realty transfer tax. That bill's hanging out there. Me personally, I think politically it'd be stupid for them not to do something with that bill coming up on an election year. That's just my it's just my political 2 cents. That and the senior tax credit, right? Like, why would you want to piss off Delawareans and seniors in an election year? I made the argument that we should have done it already because it's the right thing to do. But you would also say that, when we are definitely going to have a budget surplus, it looks like, again, how do you go that many years with a budget surplus and not do the right thing? I think it's okay to tax people when you need money, but when you don't, you should give that back first and then add projects to the system. Those projects first should probably be infrastructure, in my opinion, because we all benefit from infrastructure. And then we go down the list from there. So I would expect something to happen on those 2 bills. Real quick, I'll touch on redistricting and just give you some information about that. So they are behind. The data company and computer company they were using, they had some issues with the data. So they're working on that. But ultimately, as I believe you all know, every 10 years, that's when we redraw the lines, and it's based off the census data that we are given. So it looks at the population growth and the population shifts in Delaware. Hopefully by 2030, we'll actually have another congressional seat if our population keeps growing at the growth that we're getting. So that would be something interesting in 2030. Right now, we know that another seat has to go down to Sussex County, and most likely we'll also have another seat go down to, and I'm speaking to the House right now, and another seat would probably go down into the Middletown area. The reason for that is we know that each House seat needs to have roughly 24,000 people in it plus or minus 5%. And so, for instance, in District 22, we have almost 22,000 people. So one of the, I think what's funny about redistricting, it's like the rumor mill really for months until you actually like see a map. That's all the phone calls you get is the rumor mill. So, the one rumor is they're going to try to put me and Mike Ramone in the same district together. I don't know with the population shifts and the growths in different area, how you could do that. There was a member in Wilmington that has announced he's not running for re-election due to some things that you've read about in the media. And so, that's one seat where you're going to probably see some population shift into different districts and to create maybe even potentially remove that district. And then you saw one of my colleagues, David Bentz, which I have great respect for. I think he's a great policy guy. He's unfortunately not running again. And so I'll definitely miss working with him. Him and I don't agree on everything, but he's someone that you can always sit down across the table from and talk about the nuance of issues. And I think that's the most important thing. So I'll miss having him there. And so again, that's another district that, could potentially see some shift in different areas. Like, certain areas like Representative Paul Bombach's district, you need to add people. You have to add people to there. So, that's where you might pull and shift and do certain things. Right now, Kevin Hensley and Ron Gray in my caucus, they have the most people in their district, so they need to lose some people. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. It all goes based off of where your primary residence is. And one interesting part is you're supposed to have, if you're going to run for office and file, you need to have like a 1-year residency. So November 6th is a really important date to do that. I think the problem is when you get it too close to that date, you eliminate the possibility for certain people to take the time to do due diligence to make that decision if they want to run or not. God bless anybody who wants to run for office right now. I don't know that I'd tell you to do it. But I'll tell you it's fulfilling when you help a lot of people, but it can be a headache in a lot of ways too, getting yelled at unnecessarily sometimes. So, but anybody that steps up to do it, God bless them. So those are some of the concerns around that. I just wanted to tell you because I just read it, if I can open it here. So the first public meeting around redistricting will actually be on September 28th at 6 p.m. And that is going to be via Zoom. So keep an eye out from that. It has to be a public process. So that'll be everyone's first opportunity to kind of see how the majority has drafted the first round of maps and if there's any shifts and changes. That you're supposed to work with contiguous roads and rivers and communities and things of that nature. I would say the last one was completely gerrymandered and it's several areas from a community perspective. It just didn't make much sense. If they do put me and Mike Ramone together, I would be semi-shocked because of one reason. The last time they merged a district was my district 10 years ago. So to do that 2 years in a row, 2 cycles in a row, that would be overtly political in my opinion. So I don't know that that would be the best route to go. But I think the speaker will be fair, and I think he'll, go about the process. I don't envy him in that position because I think you get tugged in a million different directions. But so that's a little bit on that. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Great. Yeah, we definitely will be paying close attention to the redistricting process here at DAR. So we appreciate that update. Another bill that we were hoping, if you looked into it at all, is HB 235, introduced by Representative Lim, the Homeless Bill of Rights. This bill has come up a couple times in the past, and it was introduced kind of towards the end of session this past session.
Yep.
Have you had a chance to look at that bill at all, or?
I did have a chance to look at it. I haven't gotten a ton of feedback on it from colleagues, but from some feedback I did get from both sides of the aisle, I'm not sure if it'll gain any traction or not. I would imagine that it doesn't if I had to be held to that today. So I don't foresee that going anywhere. I think that was, one of the strategies that legislators can use is you you put it there towards the end of session. That way there's no action on it, but you get kind of a reaction from people on how and where that will go from the public and from your colleagues. So I don't foresee it going anywhere because there's some other big looming issues out there, or that the speaker won't necessarily even want to put it on the floor if it does, you know, after the committee hearing process.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, anyone, if you have questions, do put them in the chat so that we can get to it. We have one. Which area in Sussex do you think will be affected by the new census numbers for upcoming redistricting? Do you have any idea?
So to be fair, I don't go to Sussex County a lot. When I do, it's a specific area, but where Ron Gray represents in that area, he's got to shed some people. So you're probably going to get that in the Collins, Briggs King area. Okay, most likely, right? And that could even possibly be conjoined based off the numbers. So that's where I would expect that shift to happen. Scott Kidner probably knows it better than me, but I think that's more considered Western Sussex, I believe. Look at me knowing the Delaware map. That's fantastic.
Great. Another question that came in is, what is the state's role in the property reassessment moving forward?
So the state doesn't play a major role. That's with the counties. You know, I think from a legislative oversight perspective, you'll see myself and colleagues go to those meetings and make sure, in my opinion, it just has to follow an equitable process at that point, right? Like if people want to question that, there needs to be a process in place so that they can have due process and you know, saying, hey, my taxes should be lower, or, you know, this is wrong, this and that. So I'm more worried about the process. We'll see how the each county kind of handles it. I think there's a lot of technology out there already that they could have kind of had at their fingertips to use that would have made it cheaper, but that's a millennial talking. So, you know, take that for what it is.
Absolutely. And then a big question, you may have heard some of this conversation with Joe Harris at the national level, but any remedy to help landlords who over the COVID-19 pandemic have not received rent payment? We know that there is a remedy, but it's not seeming to work as well as it should be. Is there anything that the state could maybe do to help that process?
So the easy way to answer that question is yes, there's something the state could do. I don't think the executive branch has the passion or will to do so. I'm being perfectly blunt with you. I've reached out about this a number of times. My district has a lot of rentals actually, and I've gotten a lot of you know, bad emails from people that is their income and they've not been able to collect, and from some people that were not paying before the pandemic started, and this was just you know, a reason to do so. I even had to help my mother-in-law rent her townhome, and I remember talking to the woman up, you know, who wanted to rent. I was like, I got to be honest with you, I have a lot of angst that you're going to pay us right now. You know, anything you want to give up front to show goodwill, that would be a good thing, paying in advance. So yeah, there's definitely stuff they could do. There's programs they could absolutely implement with COVID dollars. There's still COVID dollars available. And don't forget, if you're in Newcastle County, the county executive got a whole slew of money himself, right? So I think there's plenty of money out there if they wanted to go through the housing assistance program or whatever that made it applicable for landlords as well. I think we've done that throughout the whole pandemic, where we've looked at the end user, but never looked at anybody else throughout the length of that process. And landlords are clearly getting hurt the most in that.
Absolutely. A lot of realtors are mom and pop, short, you know, smaller landlords. So it's definitely something we're interested in here at DAR.
And I'll certainly keep you guys posted if I hear anything else. I actually do reach out to the executive branch every couple of weeks with a colleague from across the aisle, just literally about this, saying, hey, because one thing I try to do too is tell people, hey, it's great that you email me, but I'm already on your side. Like, I think we need voices to be heard in mass in other inboxes as well, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah, and definitely at NAR, they've kind of been looking at what other states have been doing. So someone mentioned Texas has been working out relatively well, and so maybe a place to look for ideas. And at DAR, we can always be helpful in kind of reaching out to our colleagues there if that would ever be useful for you.
And if it is, if it takes legislation that you see, you give it to us in a week, we can at least put it in, like the realty transfer tax. Originally it was just an all Republican bill, and I think you guys did a great job with advocacy to the point where like, okay, well, should we just do a substitute bill and put all Democrats on it so we, get it through? I think there's a lot of strategies there, and I think that's perfectly fine as long as it gets done. I don't care how it gets done, but it should get done. So if you have something in that case, there's strategies around that hopefully we can help with.
Great. And then I think we have time for about one more question, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
And so another bill that we've been looking at DAR that we're interested in, kind of on the same case as evictions, is HB 113 that was introduced by Representative Briggs King with the forthwith summons. So when right now you can only issue a forthwith summons if there's been harm caused to the property or the property owner. HB 113 allows it if harm is threatened to either the property or the property owner, not just after the harm has already been done. Do you see that moving anywhere? I know it's kind of almost been included in another bill that has to do with
so I think it could gain movement depending on that other bill, but I think that's the strategy. You try to do the all-encompassing bill, and then you try to do, the one-off, and you see that happen a lot. So I think time will tell on that one, but I would expect something to happen in regards to that issue.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Representative Smith, especially last minute. We really appreciate you helping and filling in, being such a strong voice for our members in the legislature.
Sure. I just wanted to put a plug in for two things real quick. One, I have a bill out there for direct shipment of wine. I think it's the biggest compromise direct shipment bill that's ever been put out there, because it's saying you can only do it from the local vineyards. It's not from the wine clubs and whatnot. So it should have less angst from the Teamsters and, the stores. But, I think they give that age-old adage, well, that's just an entry point to change everything. So I did have a colleague put in a bill for direct shipment of wine, beer, and spirits, just to show I'm trying to be reasonable here. And so, anytime you want to say that that's a good thing, I wouldn't mind. That'd be great. We're one of only 3 states left to not do it. In an Amazon era that we are, that's pretty ridiculous. Just to give you my mentality, if 2 of our surrounding states are doing something, it's almost stupid that we don't do it. Because now we can learn what their percentages are, how we can tax on it, how that becomes a revenue, and then a benefit to Delawareans. So that's just that's logical brain Mike speaking. A lot of people tell me logical brain Mike, that you can't think like that politically, but I think that makes a lot of sense. Number 2, one of the other things I'm going to be doing is I've learned through the pandemic that there's a whole kind of age group out there that would really like to do online sports betting from their phone. And so I'm going to be pushing a bill forward through that because, again, more than 2 states surrounding us are doing it. I've learned that in my district, we have hundreds of people that just literally cross the line to go to Hartfeld Country Club, make their bets, and then drive back home. And then if you think about the multiplier effect of the people that come to the beaches and do things like that, it seems like an easy revenue stream win for the state when we're constantly spending and trying to think of where new revenue could come from. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm not a gambler myself. I play sports. I don't gamble on them. I don't believe in gambling in something I can't affect the outcome of. But, it's something that I think because of Dave Portnoy and the small business fund that he created and what his core business is, it's kind of raised a lot of eyeballs about what we don't do. So I'll be having that come in too. Appreciate you giving me a minute to plug those 2 items.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you again so much. We're going to go ahead and move on to the last portion of our event, which will be our regulatory updates. So We're going to hear from Andy Taylor and Commissioner Randy Marvel next. Are they both? I see Randy. Is Andy here?
I'm here.
All right. So I'm going to pass it on over to you two.
I think Randy's going to kick us off, the chair of the Delaware Real Estate Commission. Let's see, Randy, former DAR president, former probably chair of every committee there ever has been in Delaware, and all around good guy. So go ahead, Commissioner Chair Marvel.
Thank you, Andy. First of all, I'm speaking today as a commissioner. I'm not speaking for the commission. So I'm not official in any capacity there. There were some things I wanted to go over. Of course, the Real Estate Commission is appointed by the governor. We have 9 members, 5 are real estate agents, 4 are members of the public. We're currently short 1 public member, and our job is to protect the public. We're not a police force. We don't go out and look for violations. We don't have a tape measure. We don't go out and measure signs to see how big the agent's phone number is and the broker's phone number. We're a complaint-driven system. Anybody in Delaware can file a complaint against a licensee. You as a real estate agent can file a complaint. And then once a complaint is received, we react to those complaints. They go to the Division of Professional Regulation. They have investigators. Now, these investigators investigate everything from hairdressers to nurses to anybody that has a license in the state of Delaware. And once it's determined there's a violation to be investigated, they go out and do all the due diligence. Usually they'll contact 1 member of the commission to get our professional side of it. And then they determine whether it needs to go forward. If they feel there's a complaint, they turn it over to the Attorney General's office. They take it from there and will investigate and usually have a hearing. Once they have a hearing and make a determination, then it finally comes to the commission. That's where we review their determination, and we can either accept it, reject it, or suggest they make modifications. We've done all 3 in the past. Okay. Some other issues we've had to deal with that have taken up an awful lot of our time. New office applications. We've actually had a lot of those take place in the last year. We seem to have a lot of problem with people filling out the application. And one area they need to make sure of is that the escrow account name actually match the office name. If there's any discrepancy there, we have to reject it at that point. Another area we have a lot of issues with are new agents where they've had a felony in the past. That's a red flag. Our regulations do not allow us to automatically approve that. Generally, we deny it initially and they come back with a hearing. That's where, and this is true for anybody that comes before the commission, you need to have a good explanation. You need to have support from your broker and any of your friends and colleagues. If you come in by yourself, you're going to have a lot of issues and problems with it. Another area in the recent regulation updates we looked at the continuing education area quite a bit. We've done a lot to allow more online education classes, and we've also tightened up some of the timelines for renewals. We're coming up on our renewal next April 30th. And the key thing I think I need to tell you is to make sure you have your classes done by April 30th. There's really no excuse to not have that class finished by that time for your hours. Andy, I think you want to add some little bit in that area.
Yes. So first of all, following up, thank you, Chair Marvel, is word of advice to you. Anytime you have anything pending before the Real Estate Commission, even the most seemingly mundane thing, be at the meeting. You know, whether it's Zoom or back to live meetings, be at the meeting. So if there's some question there, you might be able to get it resolved there. So be at the meeting, even for if you're changing a sign or something and you think that's mundane, you're changing an office location or something and you think that's just paperwork or something, be at the meeting. So if there's some question, hopefully they might call on you and give you a chance to answer the question there rather than it getting postponed to the following meeting. And certainly if it's any question about the licensing or relicensing of any of your licensees, such as Randy mentioned, then be in attendance at that meeting. Did you want me to mention more about the education rules, Randy? Is that what you wanted to mention?
yes.
with that? Okay, so the online education now being approved as distance learning, so that's good that that's moved forward. And keep in mind the broker's responsibility. This was tightened up in the regulations that just took effect November of 2020, that it's the responsibility of the broker to ensure that their licensees comply with the rules and regulations. And some wording was added that the broker shall co-sign continuing education logs, and as you had to before, maintain copies of the CE certificates of your licensees. And a broker's failure to satisfy those requirements can result in disciplinary action against the broker directly. So my observation has been the Real Estate Commission is taking an increasing look at the broker's responsibility. Another matter of education rule change that you may want to be aware of is that you can have an advanced designation course, for example, that NAR might put on, such as maybe DAR is doing at the convention coming up. You can file paperwork with the Real Estate Commission to have that approved for any module except legislative update if you are a licensee who's already been through 3 renewal cycles. So if you've been through 3 full renewal cycles, meaning you've taken all 7 modules there for 3 renewal cycles in a row, then you can apply to have an advanced course count for any of the modules except for legislative update. They want every licensees, every renewal cycle to take legislative update. So I think that's a good benefit. That was something that DAR put on their report that they sent to the commission when the commission was looking at updating regulations. So Randy, we thank the commission for being listening to DAR's request on that. Randy, back to you if you had other things, and then I'll cover some more things on advertising regulations and team regulations.
Yes, the brokers supporting their agents. If somebody is before the commission, it's critical that the broker be involved. It's really a shame to see an agent out there kind of hanging in the wind with no support and nobody helping him, and he's really floundering, and we have to rule on those kind of cases. So I'll expand upon that and say that's definitely a case. One more thing, we fortunately had our last 2 meetings were in-person meetings, and it was great to be back in that capacity. But this next month, we're going back to Zoom for a couple reasons. There's concern over the caseloads going up. And also it makes it a little easier for the commissioners when we don't have to drive, up to an hour, hour and a half to get to the Real Estate Commission meeting, and when it ends up being a half-hour, 45-minute meeting. So next month we are going to be Zoom, and anybody from the public can join that meeting and kind of watch and see what we do. We do have some commissioners whose terms are getting close to ending. So we are hopefully getting some new members that might be interested in joining the commission. That'd be a great way to see how we operate. Andy?
Thank you, Randy. So the advertising rules you've probably heard were updated, but it bears repeating, not only for doing the right thing, but also I want to let you know there is a broker or salesperson, I'm not sure which, from Sussex County. I've seen an email in writing from him where he's bragged that he's filed over 40 complaints with the Real Estate Commission about people's allegedly not complying with the advertising regulations. So not only for doing the right thing, but also because there's complaints being filed, we need to pay attention to this. His reason for filing all those complaints is he feels that the regulations are there, the Real Estate Commission ought to be enforcing them. So to cover with you the advertising regulations, it makes more sense if you realize a couple things. First of all, as Randy mentioned, the purpose of the Real Estate Commission is to protect the general public. And secondly, realize that the licensing system for information you can check online, it's very cumbersome. You cannot find out who the broker is. So if a member of the public had a complaint about a particular salesperson and they were trying to locate, who's the broker, I need to talk with somebody, further up the chain. I need to talk with their manager. I need to talk with their broker. I'm just kind of desperate here as a member of the public to talk with somebody else. You can't log on to the licensing system. You can see their license, but you can't see then who they're licensed under. So that's part of the reasoning for why they made changes to the advertising regulations. And by the way, in defense of the Real Estate Commission, it was a good few years ago that they had top people from DPR come to a Real Estate Commission meeting and say, why not? Why can't we do this to see who the broker is? It really would help the public. And the reply was basically that would not be in that go round of updates they were making for the Del Pro system, but they had it on their to-do list for the future. So that's some background there for you there. So these regulations are online through the commission. You can take a look at them. Rule 8.6.2 on the definition of advertising. They basically expanded that to pretty much any type of advertising there could be whatsoever. And then rule 8.6.5.3, it used to say that the licensee would include in legible print the brokerage organization name and phone number. They changed that to, they took out the legible print wording, and they said that the brokerage organization name and phone number as registered with a commission has to be in greater size and visibility than the licensee's name. So, and that applies to all type of advertising. So people need to update their advertising on that if they haven't already. As far as team advertising in 8.6.5.4, the team advertisement has to prominently display the name of the supervising brokerage organization adjacent to the team name, and that brokerage organization name needs to be in a greater size than the team name. With internet electronic advertising, they said that these type of disclosures can be by a link to the full disclosure, and that needs to then include the city and state of the main office of the broker and the jurisdiction in which the broker is licensed. And so that's some update there for you on the advertising part. A few other things to cover with you on teams. So rule 8.5.1, a team means two or more licensees who represent themselves to the public as part of one entity. The team names, they had quite a bit of debate about this and input, and did make some revisions. The word, the team name must include the word team or the word group or the word associates. And the team name cannot include wording that suggests that it's a separate brokerage organization, such as realty, real estate, realtors, company, corporation, corp, Inc., LLC, LP, or LLP. Again, that's so the public's not confused as to who's the brokerage organization as opposed to who's just the team. So the team has to include team, group, or associates. Now, interestingly, since this was done, a couple of things have come in front of the commission where an actual brokerage organization includes, for example, the word group or the word associates. But at this point, it seems the commission is allowing that to continue, certainly for brokerage organizations that already have those words in their actual brokerage organization name. I'm not sure how they're going to look at new company names that might include those, because the regulations just say what has to be included in the team. It doesn't actually say that brokerage organizations cannot include those words, but the commission doesn't want the public to be confused about what's a team and what's the brokerage organization. Again, with teams, going back to the brokerage supervision, the team must work under the direct supervision of the same broker in the same primary or branch office and conduct all their real estate activity from that primary or branch office where their individual licensees are displayed. And the team's broker is responsible for the team activities and the team members under the broker's supervision. The broker has to maintain a current list of the teams and team members and provide information upon demand to the commission or by a member of the public. So I think the Real Estate Commission tried very hard to take a balanced approach to what they were doing with teams in Delaware. They studied it quite a bit. They had input not only from DAR, from a task force that had a report and as approved then by the DAR board, but they looked at what a lot of different states were doing. And I think they really tried to strike a pretty balanced approach for what they were doing with the teams in Delaware. And I'm going to pause here at this point. I see maybe something in the chat. Is there? Okay. All right. If you have any other questions, let us know as we go through. I want to cover a few other things that they made as far as the changes to the regulations at the same time. They updated Rule 8.4.1. It actually brings it right in line with the NAR Code of Ethics about giving a copy of agreements to people when they sign it. The old regulation said you'd give a copy of something to a party when it had been fully executed by everyone. This says you give a copy when that party signs it. So if you were meeting with a seller or a buyer or a landlord or tenant, and they're the only ones that have signed the agreement at that point, you still make sure they have a copy of that, which certainly electronically these days is very easy. They clarified or put in a new regulation, but I think in the past it was thought you could do this to clarify that the broker may pay compensation to a retired licensee for real estate activity that was conducted while they were licensed. So let's say you had a real estate licensee, they were the agent on a transaction, seller, buyer, it just hadn't gone to settlement yet, and that licensee retired, the broker can still pay compensation through to that retired licensee or to the estate of a deceased licensee if the licensee unfortunately has passed away in the meantime. Another change was made regarding the affiliate rules. This deals primarily in the commercial area as far as where they made the change. It had been before this that for property that was not predominantly 1 to 4 family residential, so basically commercial transactions, an out-of-state licensee could affiliate with a Delaware broker and go ahead and conduct business in Delaware for both the listing or also for the buy or tenant side of a commercial transaction. That was changed so that for the transactions predominantly not 1 to 4 family residential. So for your commercial transactions, it's only on the buy side or the tenant side. So an out-of-state licensee who represents, for example, Kohl's department store and as a potential tenant or potential purchaser of a site in Delaware, they could affiliate with a Delaware licensee and then go ahead and conduct that business for Kohl's, even though that out-of-state licensee is not licensed in Delaware. So that helps to bring businesses to Delaware, so that's a good thing. But that out-of-state licensee cannot take a listing or represent a landlord for a transaction in Delaware unless they are licensed. Prior to these rule changes as well, there had been some limited affiliate possibility on residential transactions, not for really a listing or representing a buyer, but just being able to communicate some with a buyer about a transaction. That was eliminated. So there can still be referrals from out-of-state licensees to Delaware licensees, but for residential, they don't want that out-of-state licensee really to be participating in the transaction at all. Regarding property management, they made some clarification to the activities that can be conducted by a non-licensee. So let's say I had an unlicensed personal assistant who was assisting in the property management services. So that unlicensed person can help with coordinating maintenance of items on the property, can help with clerical or administrative support, collect and accept rent or security deposits that are made payable to the owner or the brokerage organization. They exhibit or show residential property, except that if it's been advertised to the public by a brokerage organization, then only a brokerage employee or real estate licensee can actually show the unit. So I know there's some services that they literally just unlock the door, let the member of the public go in. They're not really, the unlicensed person is not really participating in the showing at all. The unlicensed person can publish information. So if there's a flyer or description of a property that's already been worked up by the owner and the broker, they can simply provide that information. They can supply applications and leases to members of the public. They can receive completed applications and leases to submit to the owner or the brokerage for approval. And the person who is not licensed, now we'll talk about things that they may not do. So the unlicensed person cannot do these things. In other words, these things have to be done by a licensed person. The negotiating or drafting of the contracts or the lease agreements, any negotiation that varies or deviates from the rental price or other terms and conditions previously established by the broker or the owner, approving applications or leases or settling, arranging terms and conditions, offering inducements to prospective tenants unless they've been previously advertised or prearranged with the owner or broker. So if the owner or broker, let's say on a rental, has said, if somebody inquires or if they've been a previous tenant of this beach rental, let's say, for example, we offer them a 10% discount, or we might offer them something else if they ask about it. Maybe they prearrange for, you get a certificate for the local bike shop that you can have a bike rental for the week, something like that. That's been prearranged. They can go ahead and provide that, but they're not making those decisions themselves. An unlicensed person cannot interpret or provide an opinion concerning the terms or conditions of a lease agreement, and they cannot indicate to the public that they're in any way have authority with the ultimate managerial responsibility for a rental property. So those things, as I said, the things that it says an unlicensed person cannot do that means those things are ones that need to be done by a licensee or the owner, himself or herself. There was a slight change made to the rules about if a property is under contract, but it's being left on the property for backup offers. It used to be you had to disclose that when they were trying to make an appointment. Now it has to be disclosed in writing at the initial inquiry. In my view, that's taken care of by the MLS. If you've indicated in there that it's, you all can help me with the terminology, but what is it? Yes, so active but with contract, is that kind of the correct terminology there? So if you have a contract, but you're still leaving it active for backup, in my view, that notice in the MLS that way would satisfy that in writing requirement that's being done with the initial licensee. They again are very concerned with the renewal process and the broker's participation in that. So make sure that you as a broker are active in that renewal process. They clarified the rule about inactive status, rule 13.3. I know there's a lot of people going into the profession now, but if you have people who decide they want to go on inactive, maybe it wasn't quite what they thought it was, they can now place themselves on inactive status for an unlimited amount of time rather than it being restricted before. So it's an unlimited amount of time now. Then they can reactivate, providing they notify that they want to reactivate, and also that they kept up with their continuing education for each renewal period that they were on inactive status, and also pay up whatever fees they would have had to pay while they were on inactive status. So I think that's good that they allowed some further flexibility on that. Keep in mind that there will be audits again when the continuing education renewal comes up this next year, and the sanctions for that they've strengthened. There's a minimum penalty now for a first finding of unjustified noncompliance with the CE requirements, minimum fine of $250, and then plus any other penalties they could do under the statute. And the minimum penalty for a second finding of noncompliance, unjustified noncompliance with continuing education, shall be $1,000 monetary penalty. So that actually takes the discretion away from the commission. Those are minimums now. They will have to impose if it is non-compliance with the continuing education requirement. They updated the crimes list of crimes related to real estate practice, deleted some crimes, added some other crimes in. So if you have a potential licensee joining your office that has had some criminal record, would behoove you to check the up-to-date list. Let's see, something else in chat here maybe. Okay. When there's a question from attendee, when there is a complaint against an agent, why does the broker not receive a copy of the actual complaint?
I think that relates to Andy's mentioning that the system that the state uses doesn't allow some of these things. First way to solve that is when somebody makes a complaint, they should make a complaint not only against the agent, but against the broker so that he's immediately brought in. But hopefully when the investigation takes place, the investigator contacts the broker to get his side of the events that happened. So it's a system issue. We've asked about it a number of times for several areas, and we can't just make them change it because they've got so many commissions and groups that they regulate that they can't react that quickly to our request.
I will mention that at some point, the Real Estate Commission will come up to the Sunset Committee again for review of the statute. I know that when DAR had a couple of task forces looking at not only teams, but also all of the regulations, there were a couple of things we thought should be considered, but the reply from the Real Estate Commission, which was correct, is that they were things that would need to be addressed in the statute. I'll give you an example of one. I think that that DAR brought forward, if a licensee had just a reprimand, a certain number of years ago, and they haven't had any other disciplinary complaints since then, I think there ought to be a way for that reprimand to go away off their record in a sense. For example, I know one broker who had a reprimand. It was like 25 years ago, and it still shows up if you look him up, and he hasn't had a single thing since then. So it seems to me there ought to be some kind of time period when that could be removed from the record if it have not had any other discipline. So I just put out that out there. If you think of things that perhaps you may want to see changed within the Licensing Act, certainly if the next time the Real Estate Commission comes up for their sunset review in the General Assembly, DAR will have a task force to bring forward suggestions to the Real Estate Commission. The Real Estate Commission will probably do what they've done in the past, which is appoint a subcommittee to review the entire Licensing Act and any comments that have come in and any comments from commissioners and suggest changes to the Licensing Act. I think it's very good in Delaware that we've been able to keep the Licensing Act, pretty much up to date with current practice and how the real estate world works in Delaware. So at that, I'll pause, Amanda. I think we may have hit our time limit here.
I think there's one more question if you want to answer that, and then we can go ahead on and move to the last portion of the event.
Okay. Let's see, what was the other question?
Do you see it? I can ask it too if it's easier.
Okay. Yeah.
It says, if an agent does not make the effort to complete the CE requirements, should a broker terminate their license?
This is Andy Taylor speaking personally, nothing else. Yes. And terminate them before the end of the CE renewal cycle. So if they're getting down to the last week and they haven't done their CE yet, I think you should seriously look at terminating them, because otherwise when they come up for their non-compliance, there's going to be a complaint against you as the broker as well. It is your responsibility as a broker to oversee and ensure that your licensees complete that education. So, Randy, I took that question off of you. If you can chime in if you want to, but I'm aware of your capacity.
I would agree with you, Andy. It's certainly, if not before the end of the license term immediately thereafter, because we do get a lot of people that somehow or another get 15 hours in that last 2 over the weekend and sudden comply. But yes, I would terminate personally.
Hello.
And by the way, it's not an excuse for the licensee to say, I was trying to take all of my hours in the last 2 days and my computer froze or something like that. They don't want to hear, or the continuing education provider had a freeze in their computer system. That excuse does not wash with the real estate commission. They will now be fining. That's not an excuse. So don't let it go to the last minute.
Oh, this is Morel. I got a question around the 2020 renewal we're talking about, correct?
No, this would be the 22, the one coming up next year.
2020. Okay, because I've been doing audits for the 2020 as well in my office, and they can't find classes for the 2020 renewal. Are we allowing the 2022 classes, the renewal for the 22 year, to be used as well for the 2020?
I believe that is so. I don't see why not. You can't count it both ways. It's either applies to the 2020 renewal or the 2022 renewal.
Yeah, that was my concern. I was trying to get all my folks to take them by the, for the 2020, but I had some folks saying they can't get 2020 renewal courses and no longer, they're only 2022. So I know what's going to happen. They're going to double count them.
You can't double count. We won't like that.
So they just have to take, so they would have to take the 2022 class twice then, is that correct?
And they would have to be 2 different classes. If it's a module 5, it has to be 2 different module 5 classes, and you would designate one for the 2020 and the completely different class for the 2022.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Andy and Randy, for that wonderful presentation. That's very informative. And I believe the Chairman Marvel's email was put in there. So if there are any more questions, I'm sure you can reach out directly. We are now going to move into the last portion of our event. So we're going to transition into the forum portion. This is your opportunity as members to share with DAR staff and our volunteer leadership what you think DAR should be focusing on from a legislative and regulatory standpoint. Our Public Policy Committee wants to hear from you as we create our public policy priorities and the agenda for the following year. All of the comments made today will be reviewed by the Public Policy Committee at their upcoming retreat later this year. We are going to allow about 2 minutes per person, although we'll be a little bit flexible, to share their opinions or questions. And we ask that anyone who is sharing, please keep your remarks respectful. Please try and use the raise hand function instead of jumping out and unmuting, and then we will call on you and unmute you to begin sharing. And if you feel more comfortable, you can always put your comments in the chat box as well. We will be reviewing everything that was put in the chat box today to help in these conversations as we move forward. So I will now open it up to the floor. If anyone has any comments or questions that they would like to make for DAR. I always know it's scary to be one of the first people to jump in, but we really are looking forward to hearing from everyone and getting your perspectives so that we can make sure that we are doing what is best for all of our members.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we seem to have a lot of sellers that seem to be changing their mind and not wanting to sell once they're under contract. And I think possibly that our contract language needs to be tightened up a little bit on what the ramifications are for a seller chooses not to go to settlement.
Great. Thank you for that feedback.
Amanda, I just a lot of organizations are having meetings now, and I can't, this is going to be the incorrect word. I don't know if they call them hype, where the participants have a choice to be live or on Zoom. They have a screen there. And I wondered if we would think about that with this new Delta coming into play, where you could either be physical or be on.
Yeah, like a hybrid model. We're definitely seeing some groups move to that.
Amanda, if I may.
Mhm.
Ruth, I just want to clarify, we at DAR, we've been trying to do that moving forward. Quite frankly, we've only had, actually, we haven't had an event in person, a real big event since the start of the pandemic. We are doing our next, let me think here, the broker summit in particular, that won't be hybrid. And it's just because of the facility issues we have. But then after that, the convention will be all online, as well as the session we are having at that event, the 302, that will be streamed. And then as well as the next day, the annual meeting, we moved online just for that purpose as well. But yeah, moving forward, definitely hybrid. It's going to have to be that way moving forward, no matter what. But thank you.
I can give you a little word of advice for hybrid meetings, because I've attended some. Those people who are there in person still control the meeting. So if you have, let's say, 8 people live and 3 people, on the screen, it's hard for those 3 to, break in, ask questions. They've got their hand up to be called on, and the conversation is 4 sentences down the road, 5 sentences down the road before it's even realized they want to ask a question. So if you have something really important at a meeting and it's hybrid, and I suggest you be there in person if you can, and if you feel safe to be so. So that's up to you. That's just been my observation from doing some meetings hybrid.
I have observed that the people that are on the screen seem to be the listeners, and the people that are live are the participants. Yes.
Great, thank you for that feedback. Is there anything else from the group? Anything you think or you've been facing in your offices? Any major challenges or concerns that could maybe be addressed through a legislative or regulatory standpoint?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I don't know if this topic came up at all. This is Morel, by the way. I'm a bit sorry. I'm starting to see a lot of wholesaler activity in Delaware, and I want to know what the regulations and laws around that, as far as them not having to have a license, is acceptable in Delaware. Or...
Andy, you might be able to speak to this, but I do want to make just a point real quick. I do attend many of the events through our national association, and this has become a hot topic across the country. I know there's been legislation introduced in some states, actually put right into the standard forms. But yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. Andy, I don't know if you have any comments to make. We do have this on our agenda already, actually, for our November public policy retreat.
Yeah, first of all, and antitrust disclaimer here, we're certainly in favor of a competitive marketplace and innovative business models, but we're certainly not in favor of activities that would violate the Licensing Act or the rules and regulations of the Real Estate Commission. So it's going to come down to a complaint being filed at some point. And I would ask Randy Marvel, I think he will probably not comment on this topic because it's likely to come before him as a commissioner. So he probably should not go on the record with some point of view, because we don't want to knock him out of the ability to be to deliberate on that. So I'll speak further. I think some of what I've seen with wholesalers, I think could arise to the level of being brokerage activity that would require a real estate broker to be handled that. Other things have been just more, I buy something at a sheriff's sale and, you know, they're assigning it to a buddy or, you know, something like that as far as the bid from the sheriff's sale. I don't necessarily think, you know, that alone is brokerage activity. If they were, you know, advertising it like a broker would as far as a property for sale, and then I think that could be a different thing. So it's going to be a matter of where the line is drawn as far as that wholesale activity. I think the other thing that's going to catch the eye of people in Delaware, perhaps through the Attorney General's office or the Division of Consumer Affairs, is what impact is the wholesaling have on the owner of the property. In some respect, I've seen wholesale transactions where it's a real relief for that owner. They understand that there's a fee being made by the wholesaler and the settlements ultimately to the ultimate purchaser. They're fine with that. They're just relieved to be out of the blessed property and not have the headaches anymore of being an owner. I think the rumor is there's some other wholesale sale transactions where maybe the owner of the property was more taken advantage of by the wholesaler as far as what, not only what the wholesaler is making, but what the property owner could have done with, you know, just a regular listing of the property. So I think that wholesaling activity in Delaware is likely to catch the attention as well of the Attorney General's office and the Division of Consumer Affairs eventually. But it's going to, as far as the Real Estate Commission goes, as Randy mentioned, it's complaint driven. So if a wholesale transaction you think arises to the level of really being brokerage activity, as Chair Marvel mentioned before, you as a licensee can also be the one to file a complaint.
Any other comments, concerns, questions from the group? Another question I had that I want to see if anyone has an opinion on, is there anything that you've seen from DAR this past year or in the past couple of years maybe that you've appreciated and would like us to continue to work on specific legislative or regulatory issues? That's also very helpful for our public policy to know where to prioritize.
Well, if no one else will speak up, I'll speak up to thank all of you for your compliance with the COVID guidance and, you know, keeping the real estate world going during the state of emergency. And I wish we could say we're out of this completely, but I don't know that we are. I've gone back to wearing a mask at all settlements, even if nobody else is, just because I'm around so many people. I'll be teaching a live class today. I understand there's 54 students in the large room. I'm not really pleased about needing to do that live, quite frankly, but I'll be wearing a mask except when I'm away from the students at the front of the room. So we're not out of this completely. And so I just ask all of you to just use your common sense. I think we learned a lot going through the state of emergency and how to conduct ourselves with business. So just, you know, use your common sense and hopefully we won't face other shutdown requirements, but I don't know that that's completely off the table.
I'll just add just a quick thank you and echo what Andy just said too. This DAR, I think, has done an excellent job, not only here, but also regionally. We've been able to have breakout sessions, we've had excellent speakers, and we really have the biggest challenge right now is understand that this digital hybrid mode is not going to go away, because many of us in the market, that many of our clients are now buying homes with looking at the home office, you know, as one of their alternatives. But we have just lost here in Kent County a realtor to COVID-19 who was vaccinated. And in that same office right now, there are other ones. So we need to really be conscientious here. But thank you, number one, DAR. The team has just come together beautifully. We've, you know, just appreciate what you've done for us and how we've been able to connect.
Yes, I'd like to say thank you also. I had just a small thing come up with outlines I had to resubmit. Chrissy was helping me to understand what was needed. I just think they've been wonderful, very helpful. Whenever you need help, they're there. Thank you, Wes and Chrissy and Amanda.
Any other comments before we wrap up this section? Like I said, if you feel more comfortable putting something in the chat, we'll keep this open for a little bit. If you want to do it that way, you can send it to me or the Wes privately so that we can also bring that up as well in our public policy committee. We really are looking for feedback so that we can make sure we're doing what's best for our members. So are there any other comments before we wrap up?
Just, I was wondering, the DAR Broker Summit coming up on Wednesday, the 22nd. Will there be a Zoom link possible for that as well?
Right now there's not, and it's mostly just due to the facility having issues with that. I am going to record it and send it out afterwards. I'm hoping that's okay for everyone. But Zooming that particular event may not work, unfortunately. I'll try my best. I'll see what we can do.
No, I just want to echo what Andy said, and that is, some of us have situations that are changing our allowance to be able to attend such events. So, I think this type of meeting is our new future.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. I'll see what I can do. Again, I might have an internet issue there, but I'll see if we can put it together and make it work.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wes, I do meetings here regularly, and I think we just got to work some things out in the last 10 days. I can let you know about that later.
Okay, well, if there's no other comments, we're going to just wrap it up here. Like I said, we'll keep it open for a little bit just in case you're typing into the chat box and want to send us anything privately. Thank you to everyone who attended today. I hope that you learned a lot. We really appreciate you all being here and sharing your perspectives and asking questions. And I'm sure the Public Policy Committee will find this very informative as they look forward to 2022. A quick reminder, I said this at the beginning, but just in case, if you haven't already signed up for the Habitat for Humanity Framing Frenzy that's happening on October 8th, it's in the morning. You can do so on the DAR conference platform. We definitely need more volunteers so we can build this home for a very deserving family. So make sure if you haven't done so and you're able to, sign up for the Habitat for Humanity build. And we thank everyone again for coming. Have a great rest of your day, afternoon.